You have anything you'd like to share with us today, Guru Maharaj, before the questions?
I'd like you to share the questions with me.
Okay. I'll share the questions.
I'll share my answers with you.
Jai.
Anything you'd like to share with us
excuse
today,
me,
Guru
sorry.
Maharaj?
There we go. So the first question today is from Braj Sundari.
Vraja Sundari writes, in Gaura's prakata-lila, some devotees have some other ideal than Krishna in Braj, or they come from different spiritual realms like Vaikuntha, Ayodhya, and so on. It looks like Gaura-lila is a meeting place for all kinds of devotees to serve together, and the only way that they could know each other. Hanuman, Kartikeya, Chandravali, Jatila, Satyabhama, Kuver, just to name a few, just to mention a few. I was wondering, since Mahaprabhu is all about Krishna-lila, is it a way for them to get a glimpse of it? The song says, Tata Priyagan Mana Anurupa Koraye Adbhuta Kriya. I understood that they were joining the ecstasy of Lord Gauranga through their own bhav. Is that correct? Also, do they participate in aprakata-lila as well, or is it only prakata-lila where they can come together? Thank you.
Yeah, it would seem that it is kind of a meeting grounds in a way. This is a very extraordinary descent of Lord Krishna, Gaur Krishna, and it includes an extraordinary measure of dissemination. And so it's true that devotees from different leelas are participating. And yes, they would also participate in those forms in the aprakat, or sometimes as is referred to Nitya-lila of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And they're relating to him, relative to their own bhava. For example, he is also playing the role of the Yuga avatar. So that's a Vishnu role, which is within him. And so, understandably, devotees from other prakashas or lokas of Vaikuntha, as you mentioned, Ayodhya, Dwarka, and so on and so forth. Well, let's say Vaikuntha in particular, and Ayodhya. We have examples of that. I mean, for example, Maharaja is a prominent example. Yes, they would. They're, I would say, more identified with the avatar feature of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is more directly, in one sense, related to Vaikuntha. So it's a special lila. There's a reason, I suppose you could say, a theological reason, as I'm trying to point out, for them to participate. Maharaja, he's a very nice example. He has Warnatai deities that are still being worshipped. They were being worshipped in Vrindavan, and he's got them configured with bows and arrows. So, which would correspond with Lakshman and Ramchandra, his deities, as Hanuman, if you will, in Ayodhya. So, just as Krishna contains all the avatars within him, so does Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But the difference between their two descents, which makes arguably for the possibility of what you're talking about, is the magnanimity of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's descent. Chaitanya Mahakrishna is sweet, Madhurya and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is both sweet, and Krishna's kind of sweet in private, if you will, comparatively. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was sweet and public, magnanimous. So it's a special lila in many respects. It's a nice way to point that out. I appreciate your question. What else?
Sure. The next question is from Madhav Mehta.
And Madhav says, Dandavat Pranam, Swami Maharaj. My question pertains to Vraja Bhakti. Do we see dasya-ras in the Vrajabasis, or is that usually included in their feeling of Sakya, Vatsalya, and Madhurya?
Yes, dasya-ras is one of the four prominent rasas of the Vraja-lila. And at the same time, it's a different type, if you will, of dasya-ras than you will find in Vaikuntha. And by that I mean it's not a reverential form of worship, but the dasya bhaktas, they are servants, for example, in the house of Nanda Maharaj. So they assist in different ways, helping address Krishna and so on and so forth. They tend to affiliate themselves at the same time with Sakya Rasa, to the extent that, for the most part, by and large, although there are exceptions, the dasya bhaktas in Braj, their bhav is a form of sankul bhav, which means it's combined together with a tinge, a scent, an accent, an influence, if you will, of Sakya. So you might find a Sakya, a Dasya Bhakta of that nature carrying Krishna's shoes, for example, even though he refuses to wear them, at the insistence of Mother Yasoda that he should. He nonetheless refuses to. He wants to be on equal footing, if you will, with the cows who don't have shoes, because he's a cowherd. Still, Mother Yasoda will press on, and so one of the servant boys, who was tinged with Sakya, will carry his shoes throughout the pasturing and playful daytime leelas. But as I mentioned, that's more prominent. But there is the pure Sakya, pure Dasya, I think of Raktak, Patrak. These are two prominent examples. And therefore, Dasya Bhakti is a component of the Vraja-lila, and it's a necessary component, as I'm explaining.
So the next question is from Kishore.
Yes.
Good morning.
Morning to you and your friends.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if the feelings of separation between Radha and Krishna could be seen as a form of mercy on the jivas, in that they create like a neediness in Bhagavan and the Srup Shakti that facilitates service or even depend on it, that may not be as strong or required in union. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Well, the Vipralamba Lila, I will say this: the prakata-lila, which is the unmanifest Goloka Lila, the invisible, and then there's the prakata-lila, which is manifest sometime in the world. The former, the aprakata-lila, is in an overarching sense characterized by union, whereas the prakata-lila in an overarching sense, is characterized by separation. And that prakata-lila is obviously a lila through which we can enter as a portal, serves as a portal through which we can enter into the aprakata-lila. So in that sense, separation leads to union for the sadhakas. Otherwise, aside from that, of course, in aprakata-lila, the union fosters separation, separation fosters union, and there is separation in the aprakata-lila, but it's not. It's the overarching reality is union. Krishna doesn't go away for so many years to Dwarka and so forth. For example, in the aprakata-lila. So anyway, in that sense, the prakata-lila, it's like the low tide of the ocean that is easy to enter into, whereas the high tide that presents some difficulty. It's an obstacle to entering the ocean. So in this way, separation facilitates the sadhakas, and therefore we find, for example, in Madhurya Ras, you'll find if this is developing within one, at first the purvarag will be experienced, or in Sakya-ras, the what is the term? There's a similar term, but
Utkanta.
Utkanta, yeah, kind of an eagerness. The nice example is given of Arjun. This, of course, he's a Purasambandhi. He's from the metropolitan area rather than the rural Braj, but he's a prominent Saka nonetheless. And he saw the painted picture of Krishna. Someone painted a picture of Krishna, and this eagerness came in him. It means prior to meeting him. Purvarag is a term for one of the fourfold expressions of vipralambha or separation in Madhurya Rasa. So vipralambha is not a term that per se pertains to Sakya, Dasya, and Vatsalya. We use a different term, yoga and viyoga, so union and separation, because the types of union and corresponding separation under the heading of vipralambha include, for example, as I'm saying, purvarag, which means to have a crush on Krishna. It's romantic. Sambhog, which is on the other end from purvarag, 1, 2, 3, 4. Sambhog, on the other hand, it also, properly understood, it speaks of a romantic intimacy and union. So this is doesn't apply then, right, to Vatsalya, Dasya, and Sakya. So there are other terms, but regardless, I'll give an example both in Sakya Ras and Madhurya Ras, how a feature, an aspect of vipralambha first begins to develop in one. So vipralambha is like the way, in a sense, in a higher sense. And so it serves the jivas, the sadhakas. I think that was your question. I hope I've answered it. What say you?
Yeah, you touched on a lot of parts to it. I guess I was kind of thinking about it in like an ontological sense, in that is there more service in separation, and therefore more of a need on the jivas?
Well, Bhakti Vinod does speak about that, and Pujapat Sridhar Maharaj highlighted that with regard to his statement at one point that I'd rather reside in Kurukshetra than in Vrindavan because the necessity of Radha is greater at Kurukshetra than it is in Vrindavan. He's just making a point. He really wants to reside in Vrindavan, but he's just making a point that the extent to which necessity is manifest, so too will the greatest reward on the part of those that meet that necessity. So if you offer me some water today, I might say, okay, thanks, put it down, take a sip. But if I'm in the desert and parched and you offer me water, I'll worship you. You could have saved my life. So the water means so much more in such a little service, giving water, but it means so much because my necessity would be greater in those circumstances. So of course, in Kurukshetra, Krishna's meeting with Radha, but they can't meet. They're meeting physically, but they can't meet because the environment of Vrindavan is not present, which facilitates their prakya union that she longs for to again experience under the Kadamba tree along the banks of the Jamuna, so forth. And it's not possible there. He's dressed like a prince. He rode in on an elephant, and so forth. And so they're together. But Sridhar Maharaj compared it to football. I guess he was referring to American football. When you got to the 1 yard line and you didn't make it, the last yard to make the touchdown. How the anticipation is so great at that time. Your team is right there and the Super Bowl and 1 yard to go to win, and they don't make it in. They only go 4 yards instead of 5, or half yard instead of a whole. Excuse me. And so the disappointment is great. So the necessity then of the players at that time, they need empathy is extraordinary. So this is how he explained the need, if you will, of Radha, which he sings about and which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sang about also in the Rath Yatra, and which that Rath Yatra that is transported him to that. And so this is all playing out in the prakata-lila. So in that way, yes. Right. The same is said about Kartik in a different way, that if you observe in Kartik, then what little service you might have rendered, if it's rendered in Kartik, it'll get a greater remuneration. And of course, it's not necessarily tied to separation, but it's another circumstance where such a possibility of little service is magnified. But stick, to the theme, as I should. I think that maybe more directly addresses your concern. No?
Yeah, that definitely touches on it. Thank you.
Yeah. And it was an emphasis of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, emphasis on leelas of separation, on the prakata-lila, rather than they are more fruitful for us. The longing that we find there on the part of great devotees, we can imbibe, to a small extent, where and identify with. Whereas leelas concerning their union between Radha and Krishna, it's much more difficult to identify with, because we are in separation, ontologically speaking, and we're like what is this? Vibhinamsas. We're separated amsas, and of course the separation is an illusion, but it has the illusion has its effects nonetheless. So we're already in a broader sense identified with separation, So Leelas, describing that where the great devotees are experiencing separation in a much higher sense. We can identify with it to some extent, imbibe some of that. So this will help us to grow. So his emphasis, therefore, here's pranam mantra for Gorkishore Das Babaji plays this out. What does he say? Vipralambara Sambodhe Pranam Namo Gora Kishoraya. Namo Gora Kishoraya. Sakshat Vairagya Murtai Vipralambara Sambodhe. As a very personification of renunciation and separation, and love and separation. So it's a strong emphasis in our community. I'll give you an example of that. It's kind of interesting that one time Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj, when he was just coming into touch with some of Prabhupada's disciples who were, before he started his tours and so forth, he would do the Braj Parikram, and one devotee, Western devotee, went along and recorded his talks at different Lila Stalis and so forth. And so then it was published. And in the talk, at one place, he was emphasizing union and extolling the virtues of union over separation, right? And so it was published, and then devotees, some devotees, and even other charges of other missions within our own paribar coming from Bhakti Vinod were like, what is he talking about? Union, it's separation is higher than union, and so forth. And I was in Braj at the time. And so, and I didn't have anything to do with it, but I knew about it. And he knew of me, of course, as well. We had met, and some devotees associated with him had spoken highly of me. Anyway, so he asked for me to come to see him. So I came, visit with him, and he wanted to underscore what he was actually saying and what he actually meant. And he brought up Ujjval Nirvani, and he was pointing to it, and so on and so forth. I said, Maharaj, I got no, I'm not complaining, but I appreciate the explanation. And of course, he was being misunderstood by others. He thought, well, I know so many, so I'll be able to speak on his behalf and straighten the issue out here a bit, yes, union is the goal of separation. But from another point of view, of course, separation, as we spoke earlier, is more important to us, and so forth. So it's an interesting topic, to say the least. All right, what else? Let's move on from that.
The next question is from Beatrice in Bulgaria.
And Beatrice says, Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. I'm currently reading your Bhagavad Gita, and I understand that in Bhakti Yoga, the idea to act without being attached to the outcome is a central one. This not only resonates with me, but gives me a deep sense of comfort. However, we live in a world which strongly conditions us that how we feel depends on what we do. Go for a walk and you'll feel mentally better. Eat healthier and you'll be more energized. Contribute to society and you'll have a sense of value and belonging. While all these might be true, I sense there is something missing in this logic. Could you please share your perspective on that? What is the relationship between our acts and our inner state? And if one wants to be wise, on what to base the latter?
Well, I think that there's what is more prominent in material existence is Rajaguna. Then there's the Tamaguna sector, and then there's the Sattvaguna sector. So Rajaguna, in a phrase, is no pain, no gain. I think that perhaps applies to the kind of statements that you referred to that we often hear. Do this and take a walk, which is pain in a sense, and there'll be a gain. Um, 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 and so our inner life will not be facilitated by that, whereas sattva guna is different. We do it because it is virtuous, even if it will have a relatively counterproductive effect upon me. I'll tell the truth. Yes, I lied. Okay, you go to jail, but it's the right thing to do. I'm going to start somewhere, so this is sattva guna. We do it because it is virtuous to be done. And sattva guna then, of course, is identified with knowledge and happiness also. So it's speaking of another kind of happiness, a contentment that is results, for example, as I often cite, from giving. From giving, we grow. We don't have something necessarily to show for it, but our persona shows that, exudes that, and others will arguably pick up on that and see that we're a better person, better off to give. So there's a saying, of course, in English, and there's probably a version of it in every language: to give is to receive. So the giving is the getting. This is the idea of bhakti. The giving is the getting. We need to repose our giving, of course, in the object that is capable of taking our giving, and we have to then give without expectation of return. Even though the math of it is there will be a return. So there's and so the perfect object of love, of course, is Krishna, and then to give, as you said, citing the Gita, without expectation of return, for his pleasure. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam, Bhakti Rujateta said that bhakti is using the senses for the service of Krishna, rather than using the senses in relation to sense objects for the pleasure of the senses themselves, which will foster the material identity that we have. I like this, I don't like that. That's me, if you will. That's an illusory sense of I. When we take the same senses, our material senses, and bring them in touch with the same sense objects, or the pleasure of Rishikesha, which means the name of Krishna means master of the senses, then arguably a different identity arises, right? And this is the identity of the self as a servant of Krishna. Bhakti, spiritual self. So, your question was long, it carried a lot of content. Can we repeat it and see if I, can improve on my answer or if I've missed anything?
Sure. Currently reading, understand idea to act without being attached to the outcome as central, resonates with me. However,
Right.
conditions us in that way.
Right.
Answered, while all these, something missing, could you share your perspective on that? What's the relationship between our acts and our inner state? And if one wants to be wise on what to base the latter, what to base the inner state on?
Yeah, our inner states, of course, should be based on Sambandha Gyan. Sambandha Gyan means a conceptual orientation in which we understand ourselves theoretically, at least at first, to be a servant of Krishna. This is our abhiman, our real identity, our swabhav, and but now that's covered. This is also Sambandha Gyan by identification with the body-mind complex, which are matter, which are inert, and I'm conscious. Krishna is the supreme God. This is all like Sambandha Gyan. So it's an orientation of who I am. So you're walking in the world, you're doing things in the world is advocating, do this, do that, and so forth. So that all pertains to the idea that you are this body, that you are an American, that you are an Indian, you are Hispanic, that you are Caucasian, as may be the case. And these are all illusory identities that kind of those advocacies are speaking to. So we have a different, perspective, and that perspective is will become grounded in it by this Sambandha Gyan. And I refer to it as a conceptual orientation because relative to the Sambandha Gyan that you have, or the conceptual orientation of what you are, what the world, what's out there, and who's asking the question. Okay, this is some Sambandha Gyan. There's the objective world. There's the subject who's asking the question, the feeler or the experiencer. What's the relationship between the two? And what is that? We have a common source, right? These are both Shaktis of Bhagavan, ourselves and material nature. So what is our relationship with him? Well, it's Sheshatva, our purpose as an entity is to live for the pleasure of the satiation of our source. So this particular orientation, as any orientation, conceptual orientation as to what I am, what is the world, and so forth, will foster corresponding action, right? So when you get the Sambandha of bhakti, then it gives rise to action that flows from and corresponds with the conceptual orientation of who you are, what's the world, and so forth. What's my purpose? That is called then abhideya, the way. So we have the conceptual orientation is kind of like the legs that we stand on, and then we have the arms by which what we do. That's the path of bhakti itself, and that results in a goal, prayojan, a fruit, the result. So and that is then the smiling face of the devotee, right? Attaining the goal, which corresponds with Krishna's smiling face as well. So that's how I would answer your question. I hope you find that helpful.
The next question is from Nam Bhajan in Colombia.
Nam Bhajan says, in your introduction to the Bhagavad Gita commentary, you mention that although some devotees have attempted to establish the historicity of Krishna's appearance 5,000 years ago, and of events like the Kurukshetra war, there hasn't been much progress in documenting this with physical evidence. Instead, you point out that what has been successfully recorded are the mystical experiences of devotees and their profound philosophical and theological implications. From this, a question arises. How should we understand places of pilgrimage? For example, in the case of Vrindavan, should we view it primarily as an uddipana for our bhakti, or should we accept that Krishna was actually physically there?
Well, I look at the places of Krishna's leelas as, and appropriately so, as experiences, for example, of Rupa and Sanatan, who in particular were commissioned by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to excavate the places of Krishna's pastimes within the physical manifestation, if you will, of the Dham, Bhoma Vrindavan, earthly Vrindavan. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, of course, experienced, for example, in his visit, Radha Kund. He said, this is Radha Kund. So these Lila Sthalis, the places of Krishna Lila, correspond with the inner experience of great devotees. So that's what we're celebrating. And it's not physical in a sense, but there's a physicality that corresponds with that. They walked there, and that's what they experienced there. We worship that. And so that whether Krishna walked there or not, I mean, in an ordinary sense, we're not concerned with that. That's not like, I find it interesting that Christianity, sometimes evangelical Christianity in particular, makes such a strong emphasis on the historicity of Christ's appearance in the world. He actually came, it can be historically proven, and so on and so forth. I mean, we don't have the same criteria. I don't think they can really, they do so. They do it to their own satisfaction. And they feel that they've done it in a way that everyone should also agree that Christ walked here, he did this, he died, particularly he died on the cross, and then he, resurrected. And so, I mean, it's sufficient. To me, it would seem sufficient within the Christian teaching and theology to not be concerned with the historicity of it, but with the idea, the concept of a God sacrificing for the sake of, as it is in Christianity, for the sake of all souls, and giving access to them, despite their being tainted, if you will, by the whatever it is, original sin or something. I'm not that familiar with it all, but in other words, stressing, emphasizing the historicity of it plays into the whole idea of materialism, in a sense, that the physical world is the real, if it really happened here, then it happened. Our view is the whole physical world, is it really happening, or to what extent? I mean, there is a physical world, but our perception of it is mental. Our experience of it is mental. So, to give so much credibility and tie truth to physical proof, to me, seems to be a theological error to begin with. That doesn't mean to say that Krishna didn't appear here, and there is some evidence, coins with Vasudeva on one side, Sankarshan on the other, but it's not that important. That he's and again, the point I emphasized in what you cited from my introduction to the Gita, that he's experienced by great devotees. Let's take Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Is Krishna real? Is he real? Is he only going to be real if we can physically prove historically that he walked here and did exactly this? Why is that? To me, that's a foolish way of looking at it. Look at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Here is a person, historical person. If you want historicity, look to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What's the historicity there? There was this person. He took his name is Nimai Pandit Vishwambar Mishra. He became the great Sri Krishna Chaitanya, celebrated by so many great people of the time. Great people like Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Prakashananda Saraswati, and so on and so forth. Rupa Goswami, Sanatana, they were learned and highly respected people themselves, and how they bowed to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Krishna Chaitanya. And he was a sannyasin, right? And he was a young man of 24 years old when he entered the sannyasa life. Now, this is when your senses are most prominent, and you're most desirable in the world. It's an easy way point of life to become intoxicated with your physicality and your psychology. The army wants you, the Navy wants you, the schools want you, the labor unions want you, whatever may be the case. Women want you. Men want you. You're popular. You take your picture from the 60s and put it on Facebook. Even though you're 80 years old now. So youth, intoxicating, right? And what a time to take sannyas. It would be the worst time. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took sannyas at 24 years old. Prabhupada blessed me at 25. So, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but that I don't mean to make a comparison, but Prabhupada did give sannyas to some young men. But typically, it's given to persons who have passed through the youth, become wise about how they're not as powerful as they thought in their youth. They're not as attractive, whatever may be the case. This doesn't make them bad or anything or any lesser. They've actually become more by understanding actually their weakness. Understanding one's weakness is one's strength, right? So, but Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he frightened the elder sannyasis, Keshava Bharati and Pramananda Puri and Brahmananda Bharati, with the measure of his renunciation. And the point being here that his renunciation, which was his withdrawing, his ability to withdraw from sense objects and control his senses and his mind. This is superhuman. This is a miracle. I told before that once we were in Hyderabad and Prabhupada gave a lecture. There was a huge crowd, maybe 50,000 people. And afterwards, questions were being asked. And one man asked, Swamiji, have you performed any miracles? And he looked at, I was sitting on his right, said, this boy, and there were some others, they've given up sex. That's my miracle. And everyone, whoa, Bhishma, wow, whoa, yeah, that's a miracle. Holy cow. So to harness our humanness, this is supernatural. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did this to an extreme. And how did he do it? This is the point. By meditating on Radha and Krishna. Are they real? What do you think? They had a real result that is extraordinary and supernatural. It provided evidence, observable evidence, if you will, third person observable evidence in his person as to his inner state and reality that transcends the entirety of the physical and mental world, which is not the real world. Why we get evidence from the unreal world, we insist on that to establish the real. we should go the other way around. So is Radha and Krishna real? Look at the real effect they had. Is it a good effect? It's the most desirable effect. Everybody wants their children to be controlled, I mean, that's human life, right? The difference between human life and animal life is our ability to control our senses. So arguably, the extent to which we can do that, there's a desirable result. That you can become more full, more complete, have greater capacity to be a giver. You're not a taker. You're moving away from taking. I mean, everybody admits that giving is better than taking. Selfishness is not honored. A sadhaka means to give up selfishness. The difference between the objectivity, if you will, of the sadhaka and that of the doctor or the scientist or the high court judge is that the high court judge wears his uniform only certain hours of the day, and the scientist wears his white robe only certain hours of the day, but the sadhaka is wearing his robe all day and all night. And there's no difference between his or her inner private life and public life. And it's a life of withdrawing from the contact with the objective world and the blurred picture of reality that results in. Therefore, we say in the legal parlance that, we just follow the law here, follow the facts, right? Follow the facts. We don't go to court and say, Your Honor, I think, I wish, and I please hope that you'll agree that this person I like over here that I'm representing is not guilty. And the other lawyer goes, well, according to the law on this, and this happened, and this happened, and the law is determined this way, the law said this on this date, therefore I say he's guilty. And the other person's going, it's just the facts. In science, we have to take out how we feel. We might feel it's like this, but we find out from data gathered that it's different. And so, we go with that, right? So to harness one's feelings, these disciplines that I'm speaking about in the world are signaling to us the truth. A clear picture of reality is arrived at by controlling the mind, controlling the senses, by separating oneself from one's feelings and taking an objective position. So we are not saying anything different. We're saying the same thing. We're only amplifying it. This is what the sadhaka does, right? Therefore we say, Shastra Chakshu, you see with the eyes of the scripture. Your own eyes are faulty. They may tell you that Krishna is a stone, the deity is a stone. But if you look through the eyes of the scripture and then conduct yourself accordingly, then you will see differently. Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Sandasadeva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti Yam Shama Sundaram Achintya Guna Sarupam Govindam Hari Purusham Tamaham Bhajami. He's not a stone, he has Achintya Guna Sarup, inconceivable form and qualities. And I saw it as my eyes became tinged with the salve of love. Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Sandasadeva Hridayeshu Vilokayanti. So this detachment, if you will, and renunciation is a step back from the world that looks like it's not love. I'm going to step back from my father or my lover, and so because if I look at it from an objective point of view, they're being abusive, let's say, just to give an example. I'm going to step back. But this looks like it's moving away from love, but it's actually stepping in the direction of real love, a deeper love, right? So this is the commonly accepted in the field of psychology, law, science, the whole world is saying this. We're just saying that we're saying the same thing and taking it to the nth degree. And so the result is greater also. We don't have a blurred vision of the truth. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, say, what was the measure of his renunciation? And what was it based on? Was it based on a myth? In a pejorative sense, in the context of which we're speaking? A false thing? Radha and Krishna Lila, it's false. Because we can't, demonstrate it physically or historically. Of course it's real. Of course it's truth. Look at the truth. Look at the, judged by the results. So this to me is a much more profound way of grounding one's faith in objectivity, if you will. And of course, excuse me, by pursuing that, you'll have experience yourself. The more you have experience, then who cares for arguments like that? Well, this is just a myth. This, we can't. Krishna, what's this? Where? How could he lift a hill? Achintya Sarupa. Great devotees experience this. Where do they experience it? That's where we want to go. Where is that? In their heart. Home is in the heart. That's a fact. The second fact is that home going requires a home-knowing person. You put these two things together, right? It's in your heart, it's inherent, and it's bestowed at the same time. The home is in the heart. I is the smallest word in the English language that is most used and least understood. There are other smaller words, but this one is used more than any one-letter word, used more than any other word. Most used, very small, most used, most misunderstood. Everyone is looking for I. What am I? What am I? Is there an I? And some people philosophize away the I and their very purpose. By philosophizing away the I, philosophizing away the self, for example, in materialism, you take yourself out of the friggin' argument altogether. There's no more an argument. What's right? What's wrong? There is no right, no wrong. You just excused yourself from the debate by your very dismissal of an I, of a self. There is no self. There's only, atoms, whatever, physicality. Okay, there's no more discussion. I'm not going to debate with you. There's nothing to debate. You're no longer a debater. I mean, it's absurd, but that's a popular, of course, philosophy in the world today, materialism. But is there an I? Yes, there is. The great schools of Vedanta all agree and speak about it to different extents. Even Shankar says it's an I. He says there's only one, supreme I. We say there are many I's. And there's a supreme I, and they have a relationship. So there is an I, and it lies within, in the heart. Home is in the heart. And home going, which is our mission, we'll be successful with a home-going guide, home-knowing guide. I shared this with you this morning. Thank you for the question. Forgive me for going off on a tangent here, but this is related. What was the question? Who asked it? Oh, it was
Nambajan.
Nambajan. Good question. Yes. Follow up.
Can I play the devil's advocate a little bit?
Gaura-lila. Yeah, we yes, go ahead.
So you were saying that, basically you were saying that there is Radha Krishna because when people meditate on them, there's these certain symptoms that can be objectively seen and measured and stuff.
Yeah.
But somebody could easily say that, well, there are people, yogis, who meditate on a flame, they stare at a candle flame, and then they have these extraordinary states, and they also become peaceful, and they lose interest in the material world. So then one could say you can use a concept to basically become, I don't know, you probably know what I mean, right? Like go beyond the immediate material influence.
But anyway, you could argue like that, but it doesn't mean to say that Radha and Krishna are not real. They're having a real result. Even if you want to look at it like that, it's still having a real result. So it's not just nothing. I mean, you're saying it's a tool to concentrate the mind, and any tool would work. What's a flame? That's just it's something. Fire is something.
Right.
So one thing I would say is that we would argue that the measure of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which I was emphasizing, renunciation and control, was extraordinary. And it's of course interesting that he's meditating on a romantic life, of Radha and Krishna, their interludes and so forth, which is the opposite of, of renunciation, and it's having that effect. And we make readily a comparison between the samadhi of the yogis and that of bhakti. And, that's a large part of our philosophy. And so I think that we could argue that you get some relatively similar result in a broad sense. You can from such meditation, but in a larger sense, we don't see the sattvika bhavas and so on and so forth. It's said, for example, by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, what's that verse? Dure harikatamrita, shrotam api upanishadam dure harikatamrita. The statements of the Upanishads, for example, they lead one far from where one can arrive at through harikata, which then he goes on to speak of the sattvika vikars, transformations of ecstasy. I mean, we've got a whole book of Rupa Goswami about ecstasy. His section on Bhava Bhakti is very interesting, where he describes Bhava Bhakti and Abhas of Bhava Bhakti, different types of Abhas and so forth. These are very interesting documents. You won't find this anywhere. So there's an argument that that you can get a similar result, I would say, but the result that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu got, and which is arguably more desirable from meditating on Radha and Krishna, was adding more desirable, greater. But if you want to dismiss the reality, then where do you end up? Because then what I'm saying is that there's more to what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu experienced. He experienced Radha and Krishna. Now, what's showing up is symptoms that are similar to a yogi, for example, right? But take Ramananda Roy. How many yogis are going to survive, being massaged, having an occupation of massaging prostitutes, basically, that were assigned as signed over to Jagannath. That was Ramananda's service. Yogis need certain conditions in order to attain a similar effect. That should they, that doesn't enable them to function in the way, for example, Ramananda Roy did, in relation to worldly, temptations, and so on and so forth. And we have a different Siddhanta. We have you can say that the objective symptoms are similar, and that arguably, that's all we can show. That should be enough to say this is a authentic, transformative spiritual path, meditating on Radha Krishna. You can get similar symptoms that are observable that yogis may get, but then we say, but there are more. There's more. Now we can't demonstrate that, but we can tempt people to well, we have many testimonies to the effect, right? That they're entering into the Lila, they're experiencing the Lila, but everything about one's subjectivity in terms of their spiritual pursuit is not going to show up objectively. Some things are, and they should be enough to compel one to pursue the path. So then if you could say, well, I'd rather meditate on a flame. Well, go ahead. If that's what you want. But it doesn't. I don't think that proves that Radha and Krishna. It's a doubt someone may have. That's all right. Doubts are allowed. We try to eradicate it, and as best we can, and the best way we can is by example. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was not, like I say, he's not just controlling his senses. He's in the Rath Yatra and he's singing this song, about the Lila. He's entering into it and coming out of it and reporting on it and so forth. You can take those reports seriously or not. I would advise that you take them seriously. Does that help?
Yeah, it all makes sense. It sounds like you have to go there and find out before you can actually know, like personally, right? Like there's compelling evidence and everything, but really the only way to fully know is to have that experience yourself.
To quote a poet, people will tell you where to go, they'll tell you what to do, but you never really know till you go there yourself. Which I would recommend. But, yeah, it's a tempting idea. It's compelling. So we've talked for a while. Are there any other questions?
There's quite a few, Guru Maharaj. I don't know if you'd like to take another one before.
What is it?
So Gayatri has a question.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hari.
So yesterday there was a group of friends and I gathered, and as people do sometimes to show appreciation and love, they bring gifts. One of these gifts was Tulsi Maharani. So she came into my care yesterday, and I'm just wondering, other than practical aspects of serving her in regards to, caring for soil with watering and all these things, what else should I keep in mind as I serve her?
Well, I think the higher end of that is that you keep in mind that Tulsi is a manifestation of Vrindadevi and the entirety of the forest of Vrindavan that lives for the service of Radha and Krishna. That's a proper orientation. There's a Vaikuntha orientation also to Tulsi, but this is the Braj orientation. So you've got a special guest in your house, and she is very much a helper of Krishna, big time helper of Krishna, a kind of extension of Yogamaya. Reading the scenery, the background, changing the close the curtain, change the background, next scene. So she's capable of many miracles. There are nice descriptions of the forests of Vrindavan in Gaura-lila, a book of Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, and you can read about the forests and how they adjust themselves under her direction to serve Krishna at different times in different ways. There's a reading assignment for you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Tulsi Maharani ki jai.
Jai.
What else?
So there's a question from Krishna Kanai.
And Krishna Kanaya says, do you have a few thoughts or advice on today's full moon eclipse?
I heard it was a red one or an orange moon or something. I don't know. I saw a headline, but I didn't read the article. I should have. So it's a lunar eclipse. Where will it be seen?
It's Krishna Kanai.
She's on the call. Perhaps she can tell us, I'm sure.
Hare Krishna, can you hear me?
Okay.
Am I on the right? Yeah. I think like most of Asia, Europe, and North America, if I'm correct, or Africa. Yeah. But my question is more about, Rahu is kind of like taking over the sky, and what should we do?
Yeah.
What do you do basically, and how much do you believe in it?
I chant Hare Krishna. Yes, I see your point. The nature of your question. There are all types of beliefs about the lunar eclipse within Hinduism and other cultures as well, where it looked like to some, at least for some time, that the moon or a solar eclipse was being swallowed and done away with, and that was like, whoa, like disaster. The sun is is disappearing. It's going to be dark. Of course, then it comes out on the other side. And I think there's, now that I think about it, which I don't often, but I think there's more emphasis on the solar eclipse, and it's largely thought to be negative within Hinduism. Now, I would look at the solar eclipse in a positive way, because when there's a solar eclipse or a talk of it, mention of it, my mind goes to Kurukshetra and Vraja-lila and the meeting of Radha and Krishna and the exchange that they had there at Kurukshetra, and then how that must come out, as I wrote about in my Bhagavad Gita, Prema Dharma must come through somehow, and so on. So Gaudiya Vaishnavism, within Hinduism, in the broader context of Hinduism, has a way of kind of turning everything around. You take the lunar eclipse, and my mind goes to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance. How auspicious is the Rahu, for blocking out the moon at the time of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance, as if to say, who cares for you, moon with spots? Here is the spotless moon, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and yes, moon gives rasa. Moon is important for growth. The traditional schools of agriculture, there will be times to plant, right, and times not to plant, and relative to the moon. And the Gita says that the moon is in charge of rasa in an ordinary sense, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, of course, is the golden moon giving rasa. Unatotla rasam savati sriyam paripurita sundariti kadamba sandipita sadaharaya kambare spurtakova Sachinandan ki jai. So that's how I think about the solar eclipses and the lunar eclipses, and that's why on those days my practice is to chant Hare Krishna, which, from another point of view, if one looks at them as negative, then there's no more positive thing that one can do to counteract the negative. In fact, in Navadvip at the time, the Hindus thought it was inauspicious, so they bathed in the Ganges and they chanted Hare Krishna. That's what they did. So why don't we may not have a Ganga to bathe in, but we can chant Hare Krishna. So there are all kind of rituals and things that people engage in within Hinduism, and even Gaudiyas, with regard to a solar or lunar eclipse, looking at it from a negative point of view. But it's called the Yug. Chanting Hare Krishna is whatever could be accomplished by those rituals and more will be accomplished by chanting Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram. Hare Hare. What else?
So the next question is another question from Braj Sundari.
And she says, my question is about the description of Gopal mantra yantra from the 18th verse of Gopal Tapani Upanishad. The description mentions, quote, in the spaces between the petals, the various other expansions, deities, and energies are to be worshipped in avarana puja, starting with bodily limbs, then followed by Vasudev, Rukmini, the energies of the sky, Indra, his parents, Vasudev, his friends like Arjun, unquote. This part of the description is very technical, and I'm confused about some things mentioned. Could you please explain what avarana puja is? And does the phrase starting with bodily limbs refer to the way we offer items during arati or something else? Whose parents are to be worshipped? It seems like his parents may refer to Indra's parents, Aditi and Kashyap, yet I'm not sure why they are mentioned here. And what are the energies of the sky? Thank you.
Well, I would say that I don't know what he means, but the text means per se by avarana puja, but avarana means like a covering, a hidden, covert, maybe secret type of puja. But the yantra, the yantra is a tool for meditation, and it seems to have been employed more readily in times gone by, and it is not something that is discussed, as far as I know, in Hari Bhakti Vilas, for example, or by any of the more contemporary modern day acharyas. They didn't employ this. Some schools of Gaudiya Vaishnavism may employ this more with that idea, with a kind of a what would you call it? A kind of a forced meditation rather than a meditation that naturally arises, control of the mind that arises out of kirtan, chanting, and practical service, the trance that comes out of that, and those schools employ a lot of techniques, technical features, and so forth, which arguably can be looked at as kind of a breakdown from what the Goswamis originally spoke about when they wrote about Raganuga Bhakti, which is arguably less technique oriented in its essence. So I'm not very familiar with, and I don't know anybody that is, the Upanishadic method of worship and all the details. I have written a little bit about Jiva Goswami's description of Golok, which is a description of the yantra in Circle of Friends, in my chapter about the aprakata-lila, which is an introduction to then a discourse on the aprakata-lila. So I would recommend reading that there. But what I have said there is that the description, that's a description of Golok, so it's related, right? The Golok Yantra is a technical explanation, but I follow that by Jiva Goswami's less technical explanation, which is given to support the idea of Golok by citing scriptural references and so on and so forth. Whereas at the onset of his Gopal Champu, he speaks about Golok also in a compelling way that is contagious with his desire to attain that. And that is more useful to us. So I would not know. I have not been taught how to use a yantra in detail. And I don't know anybody that has in the international community of Gaudiya Vaishnavism per se. So can't answer everything, but I've tried. What else?
So the next question is from Madhav Mehta.
Again, this is his second question. He
Okay.
says, it's often, another, again, pertaining to Vrindavan, it's often pointed out that Brajbasis loved Krishna as one of their own and didn't think of him as Bhagwan. However, in moments of great calamity, they would seek shelter of Krishna. How do we understand this change?
Well, they seek shelter of Krishna because he's the object of their love. And they've seen that he's done miraculous things. They think that he does those miraculous things, that Narayan does miraculous things through him. That's what they think. Because it was said by, what's his name? The family priest.
Gargamuni.
What was it again?
Gargamuni.
Yeah, Gargamuni. At the time of the name-giving ceremony, if you study what he says there in the Bhagavatam, the Gaudias interpret it, and the Brajbasis interpret it to be saying that, and you can do that accurately, but that through this boy, Narayan will do wonderful things, or Krishna and Narayan are one, but Narayan and Krishna are not one. Krishna is Narayan. That's another way. Krishna is Narayan, but Narayan is not Krishna. Or, Narayan is Krishna, but Krishna is not Narayan. That's the way of saying that. Krishna is Narayan is the expansion. But in the text there, it's understood. And Nanda Maharaj quotes it, that when, for example, in amazement, the devotees gather after the lifting of Govardhan Hill, and they say, how could he do this? Your boy lifted the Govardhan Hill, and so Nanda Maharaj says, yes, it's true, and therefore he must be God. Yes, you could reason like that, Nanda Maharaj will say, but I mean, does God cry when he doesn't get enough sweets, and they go, no, that's true. That can't be true. Yeah, right. That doesn't make sense. He's not God. And then the Siddhanta will come, of course, from Nanda Baba. But so Gargamuni said, Narayan will do wonderful things through this boy. So when he does wonderful things, then, and in times of calamity, if you will, in the Lila, then he's the go-to person. So all right, we'll end with that. I hope that helps. Nice speaking with all of you this morning. Hope to be with you next week. Om Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Jai, Jai
Guru
Radha.
Maharaj ki Jai. So yeah, thanks everybody, and please do let us know if you have some questions for next week, and we'll add you to the list.
Yeah, and just we have one more from Nam Bhajan, but he'll be
yeah,
first next week.
next
So
week.
apologies, we didn't get to that.
Okay, have a nice week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Chant Hare Krishna in the